Most people think about the physical aspects of humans when talking about evolution. Well, have you ever contemplated as to how our conscience, the voice in our heads, has evolved? Look around you, just look around you. Almost everywhere you look, you will see a variety of interactions between humans, many of which include gestures of kindness. A man holding a door open for another, someone giving money to a homeless man, and sometimes another saving someone's life. Sure, there are acts of cruelty and selfishness in this world, but look at society as a whole. We have created a whole way of life, a whole system that revolves around helping each other for the greater good.
Humans are not the only species to partake in mutualistic or selfless behaviors. Plants and animals do as well.
Take for example baboons, who use precious time to groom one another, or some species of birds, who risk their own safety by calling out to warn others of nearby predators, giving away their location so that the others can flee. These creatures are expressing altruistic behaviors.
Altruism, in its traditional sense, is the principle or practice of unselfish concern for or devotion to the welfare of others. Similar, but more controversial in its terminology, in terms of animal behavior, altruism is defined as the behavior produced by an animal that is not beneficial to, or may be harmful to itself, but is beneficial to others of its species.
The latter definition is more controversial in a sense that it leads many to believe that a true altruistic behavior does not necessarily exist, as animals behave in such a way that benefits their own species. And many of the selfish acts in which humans partake might benefit them psychologically, as they are made to feel happier knowing they are doing good things, which also might enhance their reputation.
These skepticisms, though, will be overlooked as we explore the origins of altruism, so that we begin to see how behaviors, whether or not they partially benefit the acting creature or not, evolved into the more so selfless and self-risking behaviors that exist today.
For a while, and in still some respects today, animals, humans, and even plants have been thought to be strictly selfish and self-benefiting creatures, all just doing what they can to survive.
So why is it exactly that some creatures behave in such a way that risks their own life?
Such behaviors seem to contradict Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, or survival of the fittest. The fittest creature surely would not be the one to make itself known to predators by calling out with its shrill caw. Yet, even if this altruistic trait was a fluke somewhere down the line, you would think that if it was detrimental, it would have been eliminated long ago.
As altruism is so prevalent in the interactions of species in our world today, we might question why. When did these animals start acting for the good of others, and how did that come to be?
When you hear evolution, you'll most likely hear Charles Darwin. After all, he was the man who went against all creationist beliefs and pursued his idea of exactly how animals have evolved from the common ancestor.
During his time, people generally believed that altruism was the result of intelligence and sympathy progressing.
Darwin provided the explanation of natural selection for the physical traits of animals, and no surprise, Darwin thought that our conscience and moral sense were also naturally selected. Darwin thought that gaining a conscience and hence a sense of morality was, in effect, an inevitable outcome if a species became sufficiently smart and socially sympathetic to reach the human level.
Human fossils show that even 5 million years ago, our ancestors were social and lived in groups. In truth, our genes have evolved thousands of years ago, and some even say that it is thanks to prehistoric foragers. We can start analyzing the origins of altruism by taking a look at the classical hunter-gatherer bands, which are mixes of related and unrelated families. They all work together with no anticipation of receiving anything back. It was found that altruistically generous individuals make for superior cooperation in groups that include non-kin.
During the Pleistocene era, they had the growing ability to use group punishment as motivation for improving their social and subsistence lives. Eventually, they were able to make socially equalized societies. Although these half-human, half-apes did not develop any specific systems such as democracy, the social life of the past still required some cooperation toward other members.
Careful not to underestimate the the influence social environments have on our behavior. Possibly one of the greatest studies ever conducted in terms of altruism was again by Darwin himself. He wanted to know if different cultures had any effect on certain groups' perspectives on morals. Although he came to assume that there is definitely an innate ability for human shame reactions, it is important that the comparison of different cultures can be applied today.
For example, generally in Canada, it is enough to say, "Hello, nice to meet you," when you meet someone new, no matter what the age of the person. In another culture, that might be considered rude. For example, in Korea, it is very important to speak formally and bow when greeting people. In our world today, there are also many different ideologies found almost anywhere. A good example would be religious beliefs that may tell you to treat others the way you want to be treated.
These ideologies can reinforce certain behaviors that turn into the habits and can become a part of your moral code, like something that you feel is important and even necessary.
As people pondered more about altruism, they soon realized that when an individual is generous, they become altruistic losers, because they are lowering their own fitness by helping others. Because of Darwin's natural selection concept, many people thought of evolution as a competition between different species. According to this, successful species survive and increase in population, while the unsuccessful species go extinct. If evolution was like this, altruistic behaviors could easily be explained by the betterment of the survival prospects of a species as one of their own altruistically died. However, altruism cannot simply be defined as such, because then how can evolution occur on a level as general as the survival and extinction of entire species?
The concept of why animals make self-sacrifices confused many. This brought on different terms describing the various types of altruism and how that trait most likely came to be.
Although altruism is not a physical concept, the real basis is still in the genes. After all, they are responsible for the characteristics we inherit. So once altruistic genes have been established, why aren't they wiped out?
This type related to our genes is called kin altruism, which is also known as nepotism. This is fundamentally the genetically based tendency to help one's relatives, as the survival of genes is to be passed on. Selfishness is not favored by evolution, as the survival of genes depends on reproduction and those offspring reproducing. Because this concerns blood-related ties, altruism can be produced by the concern parents have for their children. Generally, it exists because it promotes survival of one's relatives.
When people are generous to those that have no blood-related ties to them, it is called extrafamilial generosity. Perhaps the easiest type to accept is reciprocal altruism, which happens when animals remember those who have helped them. At the same time, these animals also take note of those who receive help but never give it. Those that have helped are more likely to receive help in the future, while those that don't are noticed and punished. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Group altruism helps determine what established reciprocal altruism. It essentially allows for an isolated group to possess altruistic genes. If a small isolated group possessed altruistic genes, they would all benefit, as they would all be helping each other out. This idea, as opposed to one altruist in a group of non-altruists, the selfish would benefit and the altruist gene in this scenario would be unfavorable. As the isolated altruistic group reproduced, there would be a greater population with these genes. At some point, the isolated group mixed with other groups without the gene, and since there were many of them, all helping each other out, and for many species not helping the cheaters, the altruistic gene became more favorable. This type helped explain how the altruistic gene was able to survive.
In modern days, it has been established that altruism is indeed not an evolutionary side effect. Some believe that humans would inevitably acquire a moral sense or conscience as soon as its intellectual powers had become as well developed or nearly well developed. Also completely different from Darwin's time, modern advancements allow researchers to collect data that can be analyzed and used for determining more specifics on how altruism evolved over the years. To study ancient populations, Samuel Bowles, an economist, collects genetic, climatic, archaeological, ethnographic, and experimental data.
He did genetic analysis on contemporary foraging groups like those in Australia and found that they have the same kind of genetic variations as our ancestors from the Pleistocene and early Holocene era. This amounts to approximately 150,000 to 10,000 years ago. However, he did find bigger genetic differences between discrete groups and these ancient peoples. Among his data, he also found that 13 to 15% of foragers died from wars which were common at that time. Recently, researchers have identified a gene that just might have something to do with the evolution of altruistic behaviors. The gene is a variant of the oxytocin receptor and is associated with high levels of empathy, positive emotions, and sociability. Of course, it is important to remember that nothing is concrete. Nearly everything about altruism is subjective because of the limited physical evidence that can be preserved from prehistoric times. So, the altruistic characteristics people, plants, and animals have come to have today is the result of the evolution of many factors.